So you are reading the Akashic Records. The first question is, how can we as humans stay connected to choice, freedom, and personal power?
We see that the first step to staying connected to choice is saying no to fear. It's realizing the simple truth that fear is always an illusion. It's an elaborate game that human beings typically play for a sense of drama, because more people choose to participate in drama than they choose to participate in joy and harmony. And so as more people choose to continue to elect to say no to the fear and the drama, choice opens up to them more and more, because they see more people and they feel more people, and in the subconscious mind they feel it having the opportunity to choose, as opposed to feeling like the world is choosing for them, that a government, an authority, a group, a community is choosing a set of predetermined rules for them, which is mostly based on fear. Most of the time these groups of people, these institutions, do not encourage free thinking and encourage a sort of like a do not enter sign, like do not go this way. And it's a very unpopular opinion to choose this route, to choose freedom. It's like choosing freedom is not sexy, because it brings about the fears of being cast out, of not having people to collaborate with, to mate with, to be with, to have people surrounding them. When in fact the simple truth is that people actually will attract the right people when they let go of the anger and frustration that's not congruent with what their soul desires, which is the freedom to choose, and for others around them to choose that as well. And so it's important for communities above all else, and for all peoples, for anyone who's choosing to live a spiritual sovereign life, to put choice first, and not a set of doctrines or a set of beliefs, a set of principles, sets of clothing, ways of eating, any of this. This is sometimes where spirituality in its trendy form is sometimes missed the mark, where people think that it's just an alternative way of being from society, when in fact they're oftentimes creating their own sense of new religion. It's just another institution. They think that they exist on an island, when in fact it's more of just being on the same mainland as everyone else. It's no different from people that choose to be gothic, or people that choose to be hipsters, or whatever. When it comes to, please repeat the question.
Of course. How can humans stay connected to choice, freedom, and personal power?
The freedom and personal power sort of go hand in hand, as they are one of the same. And the freedoms are created by saying no to the fear. And so when people can actually not be afraid to actually softly, compassionately look one another in the eye and state when someone is choosing to withhold their truth or is being in fear, and not in a way that's projecting or calling people out to be better, as there's a lot of very strong masculine energy of speakers, public speakers, and male entrepreneurs that are banging their drum and banging their chest and saying do better, or stop being a pussy, and all these different things. And while it may get the adrenaline excited, the adrenaline wears thin soon after. And these sets of encouragements of choosing your power and your freedom and getting what you want are misrepresentative of people's traumas and what they feel, and it's completely ignoring the collective mother wound, which is that we've been a society for many thousands of years that's choosing not to honor the divine feminine and the compassion and the care, and it's actually very sad. People are collectively sad, but they're so shrouded in their stimulants, the caffeines, the distractions from media, that they don't even know what's really wrong with themselves per se. They don't understand what's going on beneath the surface, because it's so locked away. And so they find themselves less and less connection, authentic connection with people. And it seems the only authentic connection comes when someone is having sort of spiritual breakdown, a sort of revelation. And while this is beautiful, there's not enough continued safe space for people to self-care for these opportunities, because the compassionate space that doesn't exist, that comes from the Divine Mother, from the Divine Feminine, doesn't exist to continue to explore and propagate these deep realizations. And so oftentimes people retreat back into the status quo fear, and what they feel is that they're sabotaging themselves, or that they're not moving forward, you know, when they have these breakthroughs. But when in actuality what they're finding is sort of similar to the movie The Truman Show. Would be as if he had tried to find the boundaries earlier in the movie, but the door didn't exist there yet. The door is created to escape this matrix-like reality and bring in the spiritual essence into a spiritual life on a consistent basis, when people have chosen to use their thoughts and their creativity to create this doorway. And so this is done through creativity, this is done through love, it's done through dance and breath and yoga. Anything that is a practice that ignores the patriarchal tower that's falling, that exists with a set of principles of consumerism and media production and just overstimulation. From a spiritual perspective, on some levels, as spirit guides, angels on certain levels are watching, it's a sort of, there's always a sense of compassion, but it's also a little bit of a mystery too, as to why anyone would continue to believe in any of the indoctrination. And they would much rather see people wrestle with their fears and face the death than continue to try to avoid the sensitive issues, which is this reality is changing very rapidly. And so the issue is that those that fear this don't want to see freedom, they don't want to see choice, they secretly don't want to see people in their personal power. It's the tall poppy get cut syndrome, where people cast stones at people, similar to the way that the stones were cast at Master Jesus. And so these people, they become similar to like where anyone's open to becoming an agent, like in the Matrix movies concept, where at any point in time one person can experience maintaining this mathematical equation of this status quo of people not choosing freedom, of not choosing their expression, and it exists in so many different levels. And so those that are choosing freedom and personal power actually should be really commended and really recognize themselves for the hard work that they put in it in every second of every day, as they are showing the way that they are running into resistances. And so it's allowing themselves to recognize themselves for the hard work that they've put in. And although it will appear with Uranus and Taurus that these things aren't manifesting physically, as long as a sense of personal spiritual values are being maintained that one can use to measure their success, and allowing these to ebb and flow based on astrology cycles, they can be certain that they are rising above the status quo consistently, even if it sometimes feels like it's one step forward, two steps back. This is all.
Thank you. So going to question number 2. How can we most balance or bring together the union of divine masculine and divine feminine, whether that is between twin flames, counterparts, in all relationships, and then also within the self?
We see that this is a very preliminary time for the ultimate joining of the masculine and the feminine in their divine form. The earth may go through many, many changes before this actual form is completed. However, there's a sense of excitement and glee that can be experienced by those to say, I was there, similar to a soul when it's crossed over and is with the other souls that are not on this planet, and the inner workings of the universe, to almost like say, I was there, I was one of the way showers, I was one of the people that were there on ground zero that was creating this opportunity for the masculine and feminine to come together, not only within the person, but within each other. And so it's actually those that are doing this, as many twin flame unions have opened up, are some of the ultimate way showers right now, and can actually convincingly create a lot more opportunities for the collective than that of the individual, because individuals working in business collaborations have the opportunity to say no to things that they don't want to experience and to align with things that move things forward, whereas divine and masculine unions within the self and within each other are actually aligning with the fractal, ever unfolding patterns of the whole universe that is not actually trying to move things forward, but it's more aligning with the natural flow of things and course correcting any errors of the mind that think that that in a tangential form of these unions coming together, that the masculine was dominant in its nature and the suppression of the feminine. And so one interesting that's occurring in some partnerships is where certain unions and certain peoples that are used to either the masculine or feminine energy are being challenged to embody the opposite of what they are uncomfortable with, whereas others are experiencing a sort of almost like a cake layering of, thin layers of a cake that the feminine is being integrated within the levels of masculine, or vice versa, depending on which dominant energy the individual utilizes. And both are necessary, as some people prefer more of a structured approach to that layering, whereas others just prefer just saying, okay, spirit, okay, God, take me, just show me. It may seem like chaos, yet it's just the divine orchestrations of the universe that they're aligning with. And so saying yes to triggers is probably the most primary objective at this time. Is it can be hard to understand because we are still in the early stages of the divine masculine and divine feminine coming together, that saying yes to the triggers is saying yes to bringing those energies together. Whereas in something like in business, where, at least in the current paradigm, although this is changing in some progressive parts that are peppered into the current systems, they don't bring in the emotional side, they don't bring in the empathetic side. It's actually sort of taboo to wear your heart on your sleeve in the professional environments. And so there's very logical yeses and nos, and sometimes these are still very personal and based upon people's shame and personal experiences, and so people are limited in their business decisions. Whereas when the divine masculine and divine feminine unions come together in the self and the individuals, they're making choices that are aligned as stewards for the collective of seeing what needs to happen, as opposed to just what's in their own personal interest. This is all.
Great. Question number 3. There's been a lot of talk of a World War III, especially with the current circumstances going on in the world. So to ask the Akashic records and also superconscious mind, will there be a World War III in our lifetime?
World War III brings about much grief, and the understanding of what's perceived as a world war needs to be understood, that this is more of the spiritual war that exists with the limited approach to masculine energies. And war ultimately exists from this propagation in the first place, that something has to be conquered, when in fact the world exists in a natural harmony. And so it's actually human beings' choice to choose the drama and conflict unconsciously much of the time that actually creates opportunities for war. Uranus and Taurus is the typical transition period to major wars, and this is where it's asking people to let go of the collective insanity of choosing their personal possessions and things like money above certain things like self-care and love and what's good for just people in general. Their hidden skill set, their hidden values that are only hidden because of any disconnection from their intuition. But should they choose to connect with their intuition, although it may seem crazy, they're actually accessing a set of spiritual skill sets, principles, and personal values. And so it's when people are allowed to align with their personal values and skills that the way that God defined people with their unique set of desires and principles of what governs their physical reality and their desires comes together. There's a certain fusion that, although it may seem like chaos, that can't avoid war. But when so many people are so disconnected from the spiritual aspect of things and exist in the mind only, it's typically when Uranus enters Gemini that a sort of collective insanity ensues, because people are just so unfocused on what other people are doing and cross-contamination of thoughts. Because people, when Uranus comes into Gemini, it's actually a big reveal that we are one mind, that we are a collective mind. And so those that haven't aligned with this and believe that they are their thoughts, they are their thinking mind, and don't realize that oftentimes negative thinking may not even be their own, and it's just fear, that this is when war typically ensues. And this is what much of the media propagation is creating right now, is people in confusion of misinformation, confusion, and blaming each other, because it's just pulling people further away from the magnetic approach that Spirit wants to create, that we all are one. Now, this union will happen no matter what. There's nothing more powerful than the universal principles and the orchestration of God and the divine, and there's really no match for it, no matter how hard negative forces want to usurp these spiritual principles and divinity. And so the best thing people can do right now is choose being grounded. Choose being grounded in their bodies. Uranus and Taurus is asking to use one of these principles to align with being in their body, and a sense of self-care of the body, not trying to get ahead with the body by a certain physical physique to look attractive, to meet a certain cultural media narrative, but paying attention to where the body is at. Some people need more strenuous exercise. Some people need more of a rest and digest, stretching sort of exercise, depending on where their stress levels are at. And there's others that are connected to healing family lines, whether they are aware of it or not. And so it's also allowing themselves to stay open to looking at what are the ailments of the parents, where they become stagnant in their bodies, and where do they not take care of themselves, and to sort of rewrite the narrative, because a lot of times generational eating patterns are passed down, not from genetics, but just from the connection of the family mind, so to speak, the subconscious family mind. So doing these things can avoid war, but it's the understanding that it's always Uranus and Taurus, where there's the build up to the war and the tensions and the combativeness, and then the war happens. And so this war may occur, but it really has to do with the set of choices that people are making. Uranus and Taurus also ask people to spiritually recognize the divine feminine and the feminine manifesting process, instead of conquering and pillaging mindset. And this exists, even in I need to get my money sort of mindset, pressuring people to pay people back, pressuring, hating their job, saying they want more money, being scared that they're not receiving enough money. These are all limited masculine principles of being disconnected from divinity. So World War III may exist already in some aspects in the superconscious from the trickle down, because God sometimes asks people to really look in the mirror and reflect back on what are they warring against. Sometimes war, unfortunately, is the only answer, although it may seem like it's completely avoidable, that war should never happen. But from the highest of perspectives, there's not a single thing that occurs on this planet that is an accident or that human beings created only. And so it's the understanding that everything has a lesson, everything has a benefit. And so human beings should not be ashamed of themselves for whatever it is that they're co-creating with the divine right now. However, it is encouraged for those walking a spiritual path to begin really deeply practicing listening to the feminine energies and listening to the divine, because while the divine feminine, the divine mother, creates a sense of safety, compassion, and emotional grounding, this same safety can apply to when any sort of potential societal disambiguations occur, where people don't feel safe in their homes anymore, certain areas, with just so many unpredictable things that can happen on the build up to the instability that exists in the world right now. But by listening to that, they will be led to safety. Perhaps they'll be led to a different state, a different home, a different country. Perhaps they will just simply begin practicing a set of daily spiritual principles that will elevate their mind, that will not cause them to, by default, unconsciously choose a set of decisions and actions that will actually lead them into the meat grinder of what is sort of being created on the earth right now, which is basically just people have become expendable in this spiritual war, because it is a spiritual war, and it's more about the control of the human soul. And because we're working at a soul level, the whether it's 7.5 billion people or 6.5 billion people, it doesn't matter. Should these control systems, these darker control systems, try to seize control, it's regardless of whether it's ruling 7.5 or 6.5 billion, that can become reality. Now, it's also the recognition that there will always be a rebellion of the spirit. There will always be a sense of heartbeats for the collective that will not allow things to happen. And while many believe that there's no way for this control war to ever be done, the fact is that because people are being so distracted and dumbed down mentally by so many of the control systems in the world, it creates, especially in the US, and it creates a sense in New Zealand and places like Iraq and Asia, it creates a sense of they're just pulling the strings. And so it doesn't look like they're taking away rights, it just looks like they're pulling a string. And so it just causes a lot of people to get upset for a moment or roll their eyes and say, look at what they're doing. But it never really creates a sense of motivation to create the change that needs to happen within, to choose that freedom, that personal power, that choice that is so important. People are just reacting to strings being pulled. And if they react all the way to the very last string, then the strings have already been pulled. And before they know it, there's going to be some people that say, I told you so, but they also needed to look at the fear-based parts of themselves. And then there will also be people that just seem surprised or oblivious to it because they didn't see it coming. And so this is the importance of connecting to the intuition, of connecting to the heart, of getting out of this rigid work-based thinking that because of the instability in the world, that there's no amount of work, there's no amount of traditional masculine work ethic that's going to create a sense of wealth or stability for anyone in their lives if it's not connected to spiritual principles that are good for the collective, that are going to put people in a safe position for, where things are currently heading. The light will always prevail, but the light sometimes can exist as a tiny flicker in the most dingiest of places on earth. The light can never be extinguished, but that doesn't mean that human beings won't. It's a question of how far do we have to go as a species of the inner conflict that we experience that projects as the outer conflict in the world and that leads to wars, how far will we have to go? Will the spiritual lesson of being disconnected from our sense of divinity in each other, that is divinity, because we all are one, will it have to be too late? It's very similar to in the Matrix movies when Neo is asked to make the same choices as predecessors, to accept the inevitable and just simply repopulate the earth, so to speak, and just sort of let the control systems continue to reign? Or will he choose love and choose the salvation of humanity? And so love has to come first. People have to take care of themselves more than anything right now. Part of self-care requires essentially looking at fear in the face and giving it the middle finger and saying, like, I'm not going to listen to your lies or your bullshit anymore, because it's the greatest lie ever told, is that fear is real, and fear is everything that control systems use to suppress human beings from their power and rising up. So Uranus and Taurus can actually be opportunities for great advancement in things like telepathy, and people starting to see higher and see above the rim, so to speak, of like peeking over sort of a rim and seeing the spiritual gifts that are actually unique to them and unique to the collective, and the sense of excitement that can come from getting familiar and practicing utilizing these principles. That is what's available to humanity if war is foregone. Instead of fighting with each other and choosing the drama, instead the love and excitement of humanity evolving forward can happen. And this can still become available to those that choose to do this. It may just seem very Jedi-like, where they sort of have their temples and their places. And while this may seem from a spiritual ego standpoint to some that are part of this or leading this like a good thing, it's the understanding that no matter what choices they're making, that the encouragement of at least 51% of the collective choosing this higher route instead of hiding behind ego faces and pretending that things are okay, or just simply saying things are not okay but then not doing anything about it. If we can head into more of a direction of bringing the true sense of divinity, of spirituality, into more of the collective, we can create a sense of euphoric connection with people and come together and build very great temples, very great places of oasis, of sustainable communities. The earth will return into our hearts. The earth will cooperate with human beings. The issues, the environmental issues, are a direct result of human beings' minds and their distracted thinking and their angry, miscalibrated thoughts, and utilizing their thoughts and treating them the same way they would treat toilet paper they use when they go to the bathroom, as if it's insignificant and it means nothing to them. Thoughts are everything, and when thoughts can be connected with the heart and that heart sense of truth, and people start choosing their joy, more and more people will get almost offended by the drama going on in the world and won't choose it anymore, because they start to see more and more that other people are choosing their joy. And so there will be some that will still close their hearts and say it's not okay to be joyful right now with everything going on in the world. But what they don't realize through the indoctrination that they're experiencing from the media is that choosing joy is the way to solve the world hunger, the emotional hunger, the spiritual hunger that we all have. This is all.
Great. Last and final question. For the people in the world having a difficult time right now, what is something they can focus on to give them hope?
Love, joy, opulence. Opulence that exists in pictures in the mind, in the subconscious mind. These are things that people can choose to align with in their mind before they become a conscious reality. There's a sense of of central nervous system impatience that can occur with Uranus and Taurus, where people want to manifest things physically, and they're almost like not a willingness to like wait for them. It's a sense of impatience and sometimes panic if things aren't coming through sooner. And so when people actually allow themselves to slow down and create these symbols and these pictures first in the subconscious mind of what their joy, of what their love, of fun, and sense of opportunities and opulence exist, this just sense of regal nature, it's something that once they start to experience that and practice that more and more, and aligning with that reality of their thoughts and manifesting from that place, the more that, number one, that any limitations they perceive in their physical reality almost become meritless because of the bliss that the soul is experiencing while still having their basic security needs met. But over time, if they practice patience, they can not only manifest the things that is of this more imaginative appeal, but they can also create this for everybody. And that's where the patience comes from, is sort of a patience of waiting to birth into consciousness something that's more meaningful to the collective. And so castles built not just for the kings, but castles built for the communities, so to speak. And so the more people at least open their minds up to these possibilities of listening and receiving these things, the more that the subconscious seeds can be planted for them to choose to participate in innovating society in this way. And so the proverbial kings and queens that have these visions of themselves, of what their joy and their love looks like, and they share this with people, it can start to spread like a just beautiful sense of like the way the wind blows. If you could see the wind blowing, it's just boundless and goes everywhere. For people that perhaps are still learning to connect with their sense of spirit or their divinity, or perhaps don't, perhaps want to maintain a more sense of grounded nature. And this is still also true for these kings and queens, as this is being called. It's choosing a simple life of just finding joy in the simplest of things, the appreciation of cutting an orange, and the amusement, the observation of the way the and gratitude that the garbage disposal works for disposing of food, or being able to look out your window. These sort of things break the pattern cycle that human beings have of it's not enough, or what's going to happen, or what's the uncertainty. And when you can connect with things that are certain, like you do have the certainty that you can look out your window, that you do have the certainty that you can go find a lake to swim in, or a playground with monkey bars to climb across and things like that. It's that sense of amusement that not only creates already experiencing the joy that a king and queen wants to have, instead of saying, well, I can't experience my joy or my opulence in waking life outside of imagining it, I have to wait for it to physically get here. And it's actually just experiencing that opulence as if, a king would, and just being carefree about it. And it's in that sense of divination of the power of the human being as men and women that raises the vibration of self-worth, that people feel worthy of just receiving from spirit, receiving from God, receiving things that are greater than what they can imagine in terms of money and people. Whereas when the self-worth is lower and they don't feel like they have time to play, they don't feel like that they're too busy or too stressed to look out their windows, or pay attention to cutting the orange, their self-worth is just so low that Spirit's only going to give them what they feel worthy of receiving, and this is just spiritual facts. And so while it may seem insane that people have to continue to use the masculine-based work ethic to figure things out and rack the mind to get ahead, God's already taken care of all this. And this is where facing the ego death of surrender comes in over and over again, is recognizing that we are co-creating our reality, and that we are not in fact the doer, and we are not the person that is going to create the joy. And for anyone that doesn't believe this, go back and do a historical fact check of how long did it actually last when you obtain the thing that you wanted, when you hustled and grinded and probably spent a majority of it not feeling well, how long did that joy last? Then look over the past 1.5 to 2 years and see, when has anything that you've gotten, given you any sense of joy that it used to, except for maybe the validation that you would receive on social media from others. When internally people are feeling empty, it's because there's a sense of play, a sense of disconnection from God that's missing. Play and joy and dancing and singing does not have to be something that is absent when people are facing tough times and it seems like there's so much uncertainty and problems. It's actually the very solution for bringing about these things. And so, yes, create a spiritual, disciplined life and work with your mind and work with your thoughts, but don't force yourselves to think that things have to move forward, because when you align with the sense of divine timing and just these ever unfolding patterns that exist in the universe, you realize there are going to be times of freedom and of play, and that not everything has to be being at the drawing board. These sensitive times of play, because of the heightened self-worth, are creating opportunities for growth and recognition, and this is where people can simply receive a surprise phone call, an email, a text message, an invite, tickets, just things that may just seem like, wow, like what, that was so lucky, when in fact that was really just a regular practice of the law of attraction. And while there's 7 spiritual laws, and this is the one that is the most popular, human beings are being asked to really truly just not only just work with their thoughts only to attract the thing they want, but to also be in the vibration of what they want. And what this is creating is, because we can't fake the vibration of what it is that we want, because of what our heart knows, the vibration will automatically align of what's good for the collective, or what's good for the whole. This is all.
Thank you. Good. You can begin to do deep breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. Starting to allow yourself to relax and rest.